So as a collector of a lot of eccentric and eclectic things, I tend to not be very judgmental when it comes to the interests of other people. Whether you like Barbie dolls or Furbies or any other thing that I'm not really into, I can kind of understand where you're coming from. But there is one big exception, one collectible thing that I've never been able to really enjoy, and that is Funko Pops. Funko Pops are some of the most ugly, weird, gross things I've ever seen. They appeal to me in absolutely no way, and whenever I go into a toy store or a Goodwill and I just see walls and walls of these things still up for sale, I just think it's a waste of physical space that they are such a big presence in the modern toy industry. It's hard to articulate exactly what's wrong with these things, because it almost feels like it'd be easier to say what's right about these things. I find the head shape unappealing, I don't get why the eyes are like that, the lack of the mouths just makes them look completely characterless, and in general, I think they represent one of my least favorite things about the modern history of merchandise. In the years leading up to 2010, producing plastic merchandise in places like China suddenly became a lot more expensive. And this led to a very easily identifiable change in these industries, where we suddenly shifted away from toyetic, complex merchandise intended for children to static shelf filler merchandise intended for grown-ups. As a collector, I think I consider myself a great lover of the history of toyetic design, and when you look at a Funko Pop, there is absolutely nothing toyetic about it. I just can't imagine how a little kid would play with these things and actually have more fun than they would with any other toy. None of these hot takes are new, and I'm sure many of you at home have similar feelings, but I also would bet that the majority of you who have those feelings, if you even collect a little bit, somewhere in your home hidden away in some forgotten corner, there's at least one Funko Pop. And I'll admit, even though I hate Funko Pops, I do have a few. So that is the topic of today's video. I want to present my list of the top 5 defendable Funko Pops, and out of those, 4 of them I actually own. Number 5, Peter Griffin. I bought this guy because he was one of the few Funko Pops I ever saw that actually made me chuckle, and when he arrived, I was actually thoroughly impressed with how much that this toy actually has a soul. Because I think that's the important thing. Most Funko Pops, they don't have a soul. But this guy's got something. And this is going to be a recurring thing. Everything that I think this guy does right, the generic Funko Pop does not do. He doesn't have the square head. He doesn't have the stereotypical body that's probably been used in 100 other figures from Funko Pop. He has a mouth, which means it's easier for you to humanize him and see him as a character. And outside of the eyes, I would say he really doesn't resemble a Funko Pop that much at all. And I think this is especially obvious when you look at the other Family Guy Funko Pops of Stewie and Brian. Those are just horrible. I would never own one of those. But for some reason, when they went to do Peter, they went out of their way to do him justice. And I think this is a great little toy. Next up, Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory. Now, once again, this is one that ended up on the list because it doesn't have the damn eyes. Although I will admit that the pop would look 100 times better if it actually had a mouth, because without the mouth, it does look a little bit weird, but I feel like if you're even slightly artistic or you have access to a printer, it wouldn't be very hard to customize this. Honorable mentions with a similar vibe include Johnny Bravo and some of the Cuphead stuff. A few of those pops really pop. Now, number 3 is going to be kind of a condensed category because so many of these showed up when I was looking into this. We are going to talk about robotic characters. This could be a character who's a robot, it could be droids, it could be mecha, it could be anything in that realm. The reason that a lot of robots work as Funko Pops is that they don't necessarily have to have human eyes because their designs aren't meant to appear human, so they don't end up entering that uncanny valley that a lot of other pops give off. 2 specific guys that I have in this category are Jetfire from Transformers and K9 from Doctor Who. I'm shocked that either of these exist for very complicated legal reasons, but they do, and I think these are just so fun to have in the collection. Honorable mentions that I don't personally have include the robots from MST3K and the recently announced Gundam Pops. Pop number 2 is another one I don't have, and that is Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors. Now, I actually don't own this one, but I'm a big fan of Little Shop. I've never seen the movie, but I was in a production of the musical in high school, and it was the most fun play we ever did.
Your temperament's wrong for the priest, and teaching what suits you still less. Son, be a dentist, you'll be a success. Say
And because of that, I'm very nostalgic about that property. Now, when it comes to Audrey 2 merchandise, I'm sure you can find other things that are higher quality than the Funko Pop, but in my opinion, this thing fills a specific niche. Sometimes you just want this little thing in your collection that can survive a nuclear explosion. You know, you suddenly have to move out of your apartment, you throw it in a box, it goes in the moving van, then sits in a corner for 6 months, then you remember to take it out, and it goes up on a windowsill, and it's completely fine. And it can survive that over and over and over again, 1,000 moves to 1,000 different apartments and condos and Airbnbs and whatever. I think that's kind of the appeal. And if you're the kind of person that only has a couple pops, I think Funkos are kind of like tattoos. You'll get one, but it has to be kind of special, and it has to mean something to you, and you're not gonna get too many. And finally, our number 1 most defendable Funko Pop is Twinkie the Kid. I've had this pop for 6 or 7 years, and every time I pull it out, every time I look at it, it just cracks me up. It is such a funny little novelty that reminds you of a fairly obscure cartoon mascot. So those are my top 5 most defendable Funko Pops, and these are the 4 Funko Pops mentioned on this list that I actually own. And I feel you gotta point it out of all of the ones in front of me that I actually own, Peter Griffin is the only flesh and blood human. Because the main connecting theme that I think makes each of these very defendable is that they all manage to swerve out of the way of some aspect of Funko Pops that I hate with a passion. K9 and Jetfire don't have eyes or mouths in their original designs, so they don't need them, while Twinkie the Kid and Peter Griffin miss out on the stereotypical square head generic torso no mouth thing by some weird convenience, and just adding in those little humanizing touches of including a goddamn mouth, it makes these things so much more palatable. And to this moment, I don't understand why Funko Pop hasn't just launched a line of figures that look like these two. Because if the standard Funko Pop looked as good as Peter Griffin right here, I think I might end up buying a lot more. But as it stands, Funko Pops, when you see them on the shelf, they're empty, they're hollow, and they just look disgusting.